Namaskar. Good morning, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors, professionals, official listener learners. I welcome respected doctors and directors. I welcome honorable minister managers. I welcome adorable advocates, retired administrative advisors. I welcome the most honorable President Prime Minister Modi ji. I Dr. Rakesh from USA, heartily cordially welcome. It is really nice time, nice place, nice action today that we are appreciating our holy Indian constitutional identities in the form of unity and diversity, historical precedents of intervention on the grounds of self-defense and on other grounds. Case of Korea, 1950. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. This invention was also not justified on the ground of self-defense. The Security Council of the United Nations therefore decided to take enforcement action against Korea. China also intervened in Korea. China claimed that the presence of the United Nations forces in Korea was against the interest and self-preservation of China. But the United Nations declared the intervention of China as illegal intervention. Russian intervention in Hungary, 1956. In 1956, there took place a civil war in Hungary. Russia sent its force, sent its forces in Hungary and suppressed the revolt there. Imre Nagy, the then Prime Minister of Hungary, requested the United Nations to intervene before the United Nations could take action. Imre Nagy was removed from the post of Prime Ministership. Russia claimed that she intervened in Hungary on the request of the Hungarian government. But the United Nations established an inquiry committee which reported that Russian intervention in Hungary was not justified. The civil war in Hungary started in October 1956. The people of Hungary wanted complete independence, and with the objective in view, they wanted to get rid of Russian influence and control. Imre Nagy was the favorite leader of the people, and they wanted to make him the prime minister. Marital law was declared in Hungary, but even this failed to establish peace. Ultimately, Imre Nagy was made the prime minister, respecting the wishes of the people. He announced his decision to do the following: to give representation to all the political parties in the government, to have relations with Soviet Union on the basis of equality, and to end Russian control in Hungary, to ensure withdrawal of Russian armed forces from Hungary, and to hold elections from the Legislative Assembly of Hungary. But in the meantime, Janos Kedar established a parallel government at a distance of 50 miles from the Budapest and asked the Soviet Union to intervene in Hungary. On the other hand, Nagy reacted by ending the Warsaw Pact, but Soviet Union contended that Warsaw Pact can be terminated with the consent of all parties to the treaty. At the request of Kedar's Russian armed forces entered Hungary. The wishes and aspirations of the Hungarian people were ruthlessly crushed by force. He took asylum in Yugoslavian embassy, and later on he was expelled and sent to Romania. The Soviet Union argues that she intervened under the provisions of the Warsaw Pact and at the request of Hungary. At the instance of the Communist Party, People's Movement was crushed by force. Such an intervention is not permissible under the UN Charter. अयोध्या से श्री राम प्रभु की आपके सीधा प्रसारण। Intervention by UK, France, and Israel in Egypt 1956. In 1956, Egypt nationalized Suez Canal on the ground of obtaining money to build Ashwan Dam. In 1956, Egypt nationalized Suez Canal on the ground of obtaining money to build Ashwan Dam. France, Britain, and Israel reacted strongly against this action of Egypt and jointly made armed intervention in Egypt in order to prevent Egypt from nationalizing the Suez Canal. This was a flagrant violation of provisions contained in Article 24 and 51 of the UN Charter. The problem was resolved through the efforts of Soviet Union, Security Council, and General Assembly. Subsequently, it was agreed that Egypt was entitled to realize taxes for the use of canal, but the canal would remain free from international politics and would remain open for shipping to all states. The case of Goa. After the exit of Britishers from India, Goa could not become a part of the Indian Republic because the Portuguese continued their occupation over Goa. India was committed to free Goa, which was an integral part of India historically, geographically, and on other grounds. In between 1947 and 1961, the people of Goa several times revolted against the established government, but the rulers of Goa ruthlessly suppressed their revolt. In 1955, unarmed satyagrahis were fired at. Consequently, India recalled its consul and ordered the closure of the offices of the Portuguese consul in Bombay and Madras. In 1961, certain incidents took place because of which it became necessary for India to take some action. In 1961, the Portuguese soldiers fired at Indian ships. Besides this, the finishing Besides this, the fishing vessels were also fired at. The Portuguese aircrafts also crossed Indian borders several times. The Indian government protested against this and communicated warning for the same, but with no response. Consequently, it became necessary and expedient for India to take some action. On December 17, 1961, Indian forces entered Goa and within a short time liberated Goa. Daman and Diu, this action of India was severely criticized by Western countries. The then Prime Minister of India, Sri Nehru, propounded a doctrine similar to that of Monroe Doctrine in 1955. In this declaration, Prime Minister Nehru made it clear that India would not tolerate the Portuguese presence on her land. After the exit of Britishers, the Portuguese should also have left India, but they continued their occupation over the lands. Consequently, India had to take the sad action to end the occupation of Portugal over Indian land. It may be noted here that in the last 25 years, the states of Africa, Asia, and other states have started wars of liberation. They have contended that on this ground, intervention in the internal affairs of a state may be permitted. It would not be wrong to say that the United Nations Charter can be enforced in civil wars of a state. In the views, in the view A, Rigos Reda, Portugal lost legal title to Goa when it was declared a non-self-governing territory within the meaning of Article 73 of the UN Charter, according to the principle of self-determination as expounded by the General Assembly in its Declaration of Principles of International Law concerning friendly relation and cooperation among states in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. Every state has the duty to refrain from any forcible action which deprives peoples of their right to self-determination and freedom and independence. In their action against and resistance to such forcible action in pursuit of the exercise of their right to self-determination, such peoples are entitled to seek and to receive support in accordance with the purposes and principle of the Charter. The General Assembly further declared that principles of the Charter, which are embodied in this declaration, constitute basic principles of the international law and appealed to all states, including the non-members, to be guided by these principles in their international conduct and to develop their mutual relations on the basis of the strict observance of these principles. All these declarations are not ordinary international treaties or conventions and were not subject to ratification. Nevertheless, there is a wide consensus that these declarations actually established new rules of international law binding upon all states. This is not treaty making but a new method of creating customary international law. प्रधानमंत्री के पश्चिम बंगाल तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार डीएमके एआईडीएमके बीजेपी टीके और कांग्रेस के बीच अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर एस जयशंकर ने क्षेत्रीय हालात पर चर्चा की एस जयशंकर ने की भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ बातचीत स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच वार्ता जारी नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक जीते 14 पदक प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार डीएमके एआईएडीएमके बीजेपी टीवी और कांग्रेस के बीच कड़ा मुकाबला अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री और विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर एस जयशंकर ने क्षेत्रीय हालात पर चर्चा की एस जयशंकर ने की भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ बातचीत। स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच वार्ता जारी। नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी। सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक जीते 14 पदक। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन। तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार। एआईएडीएमके, डीएमके, बीजेपी, टीवीके और कांग्रेस के बीच कड़ा मुकाबला। अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर। एस जयशंकर ने क्षेत्रीय हालात पर चर्चा की। एस जयशंकर ने की भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ बातचीत। स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच वार्ता जारी। नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी। सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। The Gons are fighting for their liberation and were entitled to seek Indian help for their liberation and self-determination. India assisted the Gons in their efforts to achieve this objective. Thus, although it is very difficult to find a precedent to justify India's action in Goa, yet it can be justified on the support of UN resolution, a General Assembly resolution is generally of recommendatory nature and lack binding force. But a resolution interpreting the provisions of the UN Charter or expounding general or customary international law creates legal implications and may assume binding force. In the light of this discussion, in the light of this discussion, it would not be wrong to contend that India's action in Goa can be justified on the ground that it was to give support to Goans asserting their right to self-determination, which has become a binding principle of international law for people under alien subjection. It has been argued by some authors that under special circumstances, the principle of self-determination may be applied even to a non-colonial setting, but this is very controversial. It is, however, now generally agreed that the principle of self-determination has become binding principle of international law in the context of colonialism. स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच शांति वार्ता जारी। नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन। सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक जीते 14 पदक। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन। It may be noted that justification or otherwise of Indian action in Goa has now only an academic interest because on 31st December 1974, a treaty between India and Portugal was signed, wherein Portugal has recognized the full sovereignty of India over Goa, Daman and Diu, Dadra and Nagar Haveli. American intervention in Cuba. In 1962, America enforced blockade against Cuba and justified its action on the ground of self-preservation. America referred in this connection Article 3 of the Treaty of Havana. America claimed that the nuclear weapons which were going to be supplied by Russia would have jeopardized the security of America. The jurists are, however, of the view that the Cuban blockade enforced by America was not justified on the ground of individual and collective self-defense. It is difficult to find out that the Soviet Union violated any obligation of international law in shipping missiles, too, and installing them in Cuba at the request of the Castro government. Further, the quarantines itself was a preventive measure to be enforced with conventional weapons prior to an armed attack by Cuba or the Soviet Union upon the United States or any other American country, and without authority of the United Nations or the consent of all the states which might be injured by its application, it could not therefore be justified under the terms of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter and the recognized exceptions such as that in Article 51 to this general prohibition against the threat or use of force in international relations. Vietnam. In Vietnam also, America had tried to justify its action on the ground of individual and collective self-defense. But the majority of the jurists have expressed the view that American action is not covered under Article 51 of the Charter, which provides the right of individual and collective self-defense. Professor Quincy Wright and William Standard have repudiated the claim of America that its action was justified on the ground of collective self-defense. As rightly pointed out by the lawyers Committee on American Policy towards Vietnam, the US intervention in Vietnam was illegal. The committee based its decision on the grounds, following grounds, points. One is the unilateral military intervention of the United States violates the Charter of the UN. The Charter's exceptional authorization of individual and collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations cannot apply in the case of Vietnam. The military presence of the USA in Vietnam violated the Geneva Accords of 1954. The US was not committed by this Evaluator treaty or otherwise to intervene in Vietnam. The intensity and destructiveness of US welfare in Vietnam was contrary to international law. American intervention in Cambodia. America had tried to justify its intervention in Cambodia on the ground of collective self-defense. Jurists have refuted the American claim. American intervention in Cambodia is not justified on the ground of collective self-preservation. The US action does not satisfy even the traditional law requirements for military intervention because the preventive action in foreign territory is justified only in case of an instant and overwhelming necessity for self-defense, leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation. The Caroline case Wood's Digest of International Law 2412. Further, the only legal remedy available to the US was to take the issue to the UN Cambodia, like the US, is an independent sovereign member of the UN, and the recourse to the UN would have been the appropriate action for the US. Instead, President Nixon took the law into his own hands on the mistaken hope that in politics the end justifies the means and that he would be rejected by the American electorate and condemned by history only if his gamble failed. Only if his gamble failed, legal consideration do not appear to have waited with him. सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक जीते 14 पदक। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन। तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार। डीएमके, एआईडीएमके, बीजेपी, टीवीके और कांग्रेस के बीच कड़ा मुकाबला। अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर। विदेश मंत्री डॉक्टर एस जयशंकर ने क्षेत्रीय हालात पर चर्चा की। एस जयशंकर ने भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ की बातचीत। स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच वार्ता जारी। नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी। सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक जीते 14 पदक। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन। तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार। डीएमके, एआईडीएमके, बीजेपी, टीवीके और कांग्रेस के बीच कड़ा मुकाबला। अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री और विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर। विदेश मंत्री डॉक्टर एस जयशंकर ने क्षेत्रीय हालात पर चर्चा की। एस जयशंकर ने भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ की बातचीत। द अफगान इशू। सोवियत Afghan Treaty of Friendship. The contention of the then Soviet Union was that it sent Soviet troops to Afghanistan at the request of Afghan government and that it was in conformity with the Soviet-Afghan Treaty of Friendship, good neighborliness and cooperation and Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Under Article 4 of the treaty, Soviet Union had plans to come to the rescue of Afghanistan if it was involved by a armed conflict. This treaty, it may be submitted, is in conformity with Article 52, Para 1 of the Charter. The essential condition under which Article 51 can be validly invoked is that an armed attack occurs. Though ordinary border conflicts do not constitute armed attacks, these words also do not necessarily connote a full-fledged war. Arms and weapons were being supplied to the dissidents in Afghanistan to strengthen the anti-Soviet elements so as to engineer the overthrow of the new Afghan regime headed by Kamel. In this context, President Babrak Kamal was fully entitled and competent to seek Soviet assistance, and the Soviet Union was justified in responding to the request as regards the contention, and Soviet Union sent troops at the request of Kabul. This statement has been corroborated by the new plan design at the UN and elsewhere several times, even if the words armed attack are given very narrow and strict interpretation, and it is considered that Article 51 could not be validly involved. Sending of troops by Soviet Union under Soviet-Afghan Treaty at the request of Kabul does not constitute violation of international law, including the Charter of the UN, so long as your Soviet troops remain in Afghanistan and do not attack any other sovereign state. It may be noted here that on 15 October 1956, the Soviet Union standard started pulling out some of its troops stationed in Afghanistan. Earlier, the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev declared on 28 July 1956 that six Soviet regiments would be withdrawn from Afghanistan before the end of this year. Subsequently, all Soviet troops were withdrawn from the अफगानिस्तान ऐसे सेंड करने की भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ बातचीत स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच शांति वार्ता जारी नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा प्रधानमंत्री मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन Argentina intervention in Falkland Islands. Falkland Islands were discovered by Spanish navigators in the 16th century. Nearly 150 years later, a British navigator, John Strong, passed through the island and without occupying them, named Falkland after Viscount Falkland, who was a treasurer to the British Navy in those days. The Spanish in 1770 and Argentina from 1822 and 1833. On 2nd January 1833 at Port Soledad, British Captain John James Oslo, if command of the corvettes Clio took the islands by force, expelling the Argentine population and authorities residing in them. Since at that time in war, much less use of force was not prohibited under international law, annexation of territory by force could not be termed as illegal war as was the war was then considered as an attribute of sovereignty. The position has altogether changed after the adoption of the Charter of the United Nations. The Charter prohibits not only war but also use of force for the settlement of international disputes. On 2 April 1982, the military government of Argentina declared that the country's armed forces had recovered Falkland, South Georgia, and South Sandwich Island through a successful military operation on 3 April 1982. Britain ordered a large naval task force to the Falklands and froze Argentina assets in retaliation of military invasion. On April 4, 1982, the Security Council passed a resolution calling for immediate withdrawal of Argentina troops from Falkland Islands. On 30 April 1982, Argentina accepted, rather was forced to accept due to British friction, the Security Council resolution to withdraw its forces from Falkland Island. सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा विदेश मंत्री का यूएई दौरा टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक जीते 14 पदक प्रधानमंत्री मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन। तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार। पश्चिमी एशिया में शांति के प्रयास जारी। डीएमके, एआईएडीएमके, बीजेपी, टीवीके और कांग्रेस के बीच बड़ा मुकाबला। अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर। विदेश मंत्री डॉक्टर जयशंकर ने क्षेत्रीय हालात पर चर्चा की। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का जलवा। जयशंकर ने की भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ बातचीत। स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच वार्ता जारी। नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी। पश्चिम बंगाल का चुनावी घमासान। सिलीगुड़ी में आज पीएम की विशाल विजय संकल्प सभा। सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक राजनीतिक दलों का घमासान। पश्चिम बंगाल का चुनावी घमासान। प्रधानमंत्री मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन। तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार। डीएमके, एआईडीएमके, बीजेपी, टीवीके और कांग्रेस के बीच कड़ा मुकाबला। तमिलनाडु विधानसभा चुनाव। अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री और विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर। विदेश मंत्री एस जयशंकर ने क्षेत्रीय हालात पर चर्चा की। तमिलनाडु विधानसभा चुनाव। एस जयशंकर ने की भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ बातचीत। सभी दलों ने प्रचार में झोंकी ताकत। स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच वार्ता जारी। नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई। सभी दलों ने प्रचार में झोंकी ताकत। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन। सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। Argentina's action was clearly violative of Article 2.4 and Article 2.3 of the UN Charter. It amounted to aggression and therefore Britain was justified to exercise her right of self-defense under Article 51 of the Charter. The Argentine action cannot be justified even on the ground of the principle of self-determination. Unlike India's action in Goa, inhabitants of the Falkland Islands had opted to remain in and with Great Britain. They even resisted the capture of the islands by Argentina, but as a colonial situation, British action deserves condemnation. Sooner it quits the islands, the better. American intervention in Grenada. On 25 October 1983, America and six Caribbean countries, Antigua, Barbados, Dominica, Jamaica, Saint Lucia, and Saint Vincent, attacked Grenada. The US claimed that its troops and had participated in the joint action to protect US citizens and evacuate those who wished to leave and to provide support for the Eastern Caribbean forces in helping the people of Grenada and restore order in that country. America is guilty of making unilateral armed intervention in Grenada. It is a flagrant violation of international law, including the Charter of the UN. America was as sought to justify its action in Grenada on the following three grounds: safety of innocent people, including 1,000 Americans, to arrest or check increasing disorder in Grenada, to establish law and order in governmental institutions in Grenada. The first ground is totally unjustified because, in accordance with international law, including the Charter of the UN, no state is entitled to intervene in the affairs of another state except on the ground of self-defense. As regards the ground of self-defense, a member of state of the UN can intervene in the affairs of another state if an armed attack on it has taken place. Moreover, other conditions mentioned in Article 51 of the Charter must be fulfilled. It may be added here that leaving apart the legal position even on facts American action cannot be justified. Out of 1,000 Americans in Canada, 800 are the students of a medical college. The chancellor of the said medical college made it clear that there was no danger to the security of American students. Therefore, legally or otherwise, American claim is untenable. The second ground is also untenable. The disorder, if any, in Grenada is internal and domestic affairs of Grenada, and no other state is entitled to intervene in Grenada on this ground. The third ground is also untenable and unjustified. On the basis of facts, also American claim is wrong because the military coup had not led to an increase of disorder in Grenada. Even if there was some increase in the disorder, the conditions were rapidly returning to normalcy. It may therefore be concluded that American intervention in Grenada cannot be justified on any ground whatsoever. It is clear and flagrant violation of the rules of international law, including the Charter of the UN, and deserves to be condemned by all the member states of the UN and other states. US intervention in Nicaragua on 9 April 1984. Nicaragua filed a case against the United States of America in the International Court of Justice and had charging the US with waging of covert war to topple the government in Managua, Nicaragua. Nicaragua told the World Court that more than 6,000 counter-revolutionaries raided Nicaragua in last month. They mined the three main seaports, damaging ships' sides, threatening to cut off Nicaragua economically from the rest of the world. And the Reagan administration was seeking $21 billion in funding to support contra activities. President Reagan of the US expressed the view that Nicaragua's Sandinista government must be overthrown. It is continue to refuse to share power. He further said that unless the Nicaraguan government sought democracy, the only alternative for the rebels would be to have their way and take over. In case concerning military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua, Nicaragua versus US International Court of Justice indicated interim measures on 10 May 1984 holding unanimously that the US should immediately seize and refrain from any action restricting, blocking, or endangering access to or from Nicaragua ports, and in particular the laying of mines. The World Court further held that the right to sovereignty and to political independence possessed by Nicaragua, like any other state of the region or of the world, should be fully respected and should not in any way jeopardized by any military and paramilitary activities which are prohibited by the principles of international law, in particular the principle that states should refrain in their international relations the treat from the threat or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any states, and the principle concerning the duty not to intervene in matters within the domestic jurisdiction of a state, principle embodied in the UN Charter and the Charter of the Organization of American States. नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी। सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक जीते चौथा पदक। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी के पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन। तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार। डीएमके, एआईएडीएमके, बीजेपी, टीवी और कांग्रेस के बीच कड़ा मुकाबला। अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री और विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर। विदेश मंत्री डॉक्टर एस जयशंकर ने क्षेत्रीय हालात पर चर्चा की। एस जयशंकर ने की भारतीय समुदाय के सदस्यों के साथ बातचीत। स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच वार्ता जारी। नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई। एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी। सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा। टूर्नामेंट में भारत ने अब तक जीते चौथा पदक। The World Court gave its final verdict on 27 June 1986. The court held the arming and training of the Contras in is a violation of the prohibition of the force as laid down in the UN Charter. The financing of the Contras undoubtedly constitutes intervention in Nicaraguan sovereignty by the USA. The US government announced its decision To ignore the verdict of the court, the US charged that the objectives of the court were being subverted by Nicaragua's efforts to use the court as a political weapon. Thus, there was no justification whatsoever for the US to intervene in the affairs of Nicaragua. American intervention in Nicaragua was a flagrant violation of the basic provisions of the UN Charter. The US assumed upon itself the role of international policeman in Central America. This is prohibited by the Charter of the UN and deserves to be universally condemned. The main reason given by the US to give aid to Nicaraguan rebels was to overthrow dictatorship or oppressive government or to restore democracy. International law does not permit intervention on this ground. US attack on Libya 1986. On April 1986, American aircrafts attacked two cities of Libya, Tripoli and Benghazi. According to the American government, the said air attack was a reprisal against terrorist activities against American nationals and was launched to discourage Libya from engaging in such terrorist activities. It was the immediate reaction of the Berlin explosion wherein and one American and one terrorist had died. Holding Libya responsible for the explosion, President Ronald Reagan of the US declared that such attacks would be repeated if Libya did not cease terrorist activities against the Americans. The main target of the attack was the residence of Colonel Gaddafi. Though Colonel Gaddafi himself had escaped, his 15 months adopted daughter died and his two sons were injured. The matter was raised in the Security Council and an endeavor was made to condemn American action through a resolution, but it was defeated by triple veto exercised by the US, UK, and France. However, the General Assembly of the UN on 21 November 1986 passed a resolution condemning the US military attack against Libya. The resolution affirmed the right of Libya to receive appropriate compensation for the material and human loss inflicted upon it. The US attack was rightly described as violation of international law, including the Charter of the UN, besides being violative of the Article 2 of the UN Charter. American action was also not justified on the ground of reprisal. There was no reasonable proportion between American air attack and the alleged terrorist acts of Libya. As regards triple veto exercised by the US, UK, and France, though it cannot be termed as a violation of the UN Charter, it is definitely an abuse of the power conferred on the permanent members of the Security Council. Dropping of supplies by Indian aircrafts in Sri Lanka, despite opposition of Sri Lanka, the dropping of supplies in Jaffna, Sri Lanka by Indian aircrafts on humanitarian grounds amounted to intervention in the internal affairs of Sri Lanka and cannot be justified on any ground whatsoever under international law as held by the International Court of Justice in case concerning military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua. Nicaragua versus US judgment dated 27 June 1986 in the absence of the request of a sovereign state concerned entry of aircrafts in the airspace of that state amounts to intervention since Indian action was not on the request of Sri Lanka. Rather, it was opposed by Sri Lanka. It was clearly violative of Article 2 of the United Nations Trade Charter. It may, however, be noted that the matter of dropping of supplies by Indian aircrafts has now only academic interest because of the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord in Sri Lanka Accord of 29 July 1987 and subsequent events. Questions of the withdrawal of Indian peacekeeping forces (IPKF) from Sri Lanka. Para 6 of the Indian Sri Lanka Agreement of July 29, 1987 provided the following. The Prime Minister of India and President of Sri Lanka also agree that in the terms of paragraph 2.14 and paragraph 2.16c of the agreement, an Indian peacekeeping contingent may be invited by the President of Sri Lanka to guarantee and enforce the cessation of hostilities if so required. IPKF was sent on the request of the President of Sri Lanka, and hence, when the latter requested for their withdrawal, they ought to have been withdrawn forthwith. Then President Premdasa asked India to withdraw IPKF by the end of July 1989. India, instead of withdrawing the IPKF as desired, connected the withdrawal of IPKF with the devolution of powers in the northeast provinces. India, however, proposed to withdraw IPKF by 31 December 1989. The IPKF were not withdrawn even by 31 December 1989. It was wrong and unjustified on the part of India to connect the withdrawal of IPKF with devolution of powers in northeast provinces, as pointed out by Shri V.R. Krishna Iyer, retired judge of the Supreme Court. Our army went in only on condition that it would be there only on invitation by the president and agreeing to leave on request by him to turn an invited army into a defiant foreign force, refusing to quit when demanded in when demanded is blatant breach. Further, even an infant in international law will call this negative aggression. Negative aggression is where a foreign force once in by invitation for a limited purpose exceeds that purpose or refuses to return an revocation of the intervention. Invitation. Thus continued presence of IPKF after the request of Sri Lanka was clearly violative of international law. During the Prime Ministership of Mr. V.P. Singh, India adopted a reasonable attitude and agreed to withdraw IPKF by 31 March 1990. In pursuance of the said agreement, India withdrew IPKF even earlier than the said date, that is, by 24 March 1990. American intervention in Panama. American intervention in Panama has rightly been termed as brutal and wholly unwarranted interference in the affairs of a small country. General Manuel Noriega was the Panama's top military officer and effective ruler since 1983. In February, he formally seized power of the ruler. Elections were held in 1989, but when it became clear that the opposition was gaining a decisive victory and that Mr. Gilumro Endara had won the presidential election, General Niaka Noriga annulled elections, besides doing his best to destroy democratic norms in Panama. He deserved universal condemnation for his connection with drug business. He was accused of accepting millions of dollars in bribes from the Colombian Medellin drug cartel to protect shipments of cocaine. स्थायी शांति के लिए अमेरिका और ईरान के बीच वार्ता जारी. नेतन्याहू ने लेबनान से शांति समझौते की इच्छा जताई. एशियन कुश्ती चैंपियनशिप में भारत का शानदार प्रदर्शन जारी. सुजीत और अभिमन्यु ने जमाया स्वर्ण पदक पर कब्जा. टूर्नामेंट में भारत नरेंद्र मोदी पश्चिम बंगाल दौरे का आज दूसरा दिन. तमिलनाडु में जोर शोर से जारी है चुनाव प्रचार. अबू धाबी में यूएई के प्रधानमंत्री और विदेश मंत्री से मिले जयशंकर. The immediate cause or excuse for US intervention arose when an unarmed US officer was shot and killed in confrontation. Another was injured, and third was manhandled, and his wife was abused. On the midnight of 19 December 1989, US forces invaded US military forces into Panama City in order to protect American lives, restore the democratic process, preserve the integrity of the Panama Canal. It is under apprehending under and apprehend General Manuel Antonio Noriega, who was under indictment of US on drug trafficking, charged. The US claimed to have removed a dictator and restored democracy. After seeking political asylum in Papa Nuncio in Panama for some time, General Noriega ultimately surrendered to the US troops on 4 January 1990. Noriega was immediately taken to the US for his trial. None of the grounds advanced by the US justify US invasion of Panama. Since the US not at all victim of an armed attack, US intervention on the ground of self-defense was not at all justified, and it was clearly violative of Article 51 of the UN Charter. Yet another ground advanced by the US to justify its action in Panama was to remove a dictator and to restore democracy. Intervention on this ground is not at all permissible under the Charter of the UN. The US intervention was clearly violative of Article 2.4 of the Charter. In case concerning military and paramilitary activities in and against Nicaragua, the International Court of Justice held that no general right of intervention in support of an opposition within another state exists in contemporary international law. Further, under international law enforced today, whether customary international law or that of the United Nations system, states do not have a right of collective armed response to act which do not constitute an armed attack. Thus, America's intervention on the ground of restoring democracy in Panama need not be justified. Yet another ground taken by America as justification of its action in Panama was to apprehend General Noriega and try him in America on charge of drug trafficking. But even this was violating of Article 2.4 and Article 51 of the Charter. The UN is based on sovereign equality of all its members. Even the drug menace cannot dilute that principle. I thank all my brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students, scholar, teacher, trainer, professor, professional officer, official, listener, learner. I thank all respected doctor directors. I thank all honorable minister managers. I thank all admirable advocates, advisor, and Mr. Advisor. I thank the most honorable President Mr. Modi ji. Thank you very much. Nice to see all of you. Thank you. Dhanyavad.